Michelle Shorts here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a clean and simple friendship card to share with you using the Best Buds set. So let's get started. This is the adorable Best Buds set. Lots of lovely images and sentiments in this set, and I'm going to be using the bunny there, holding the balloon with the guinea pig on top of the balloon. I think it's just absolutely adorable. So I've stamped it down onto some smooth white cardstock using extreme black ink. And now I'm colouring in the image with Copic markers. For 99% of the time I like to work darkest to lightest with Copic markers. That's just my preferred method. So I'm mapping out where I want my darkest areas to be on this image using the C7 Copic marker. This is in the cool grey tones of greys for the Copic markers. So I'm kind of adding most of the darkest colour towards the right hand side, and then also a little bit kind of on the bottom of his arm, and then also the bottom of his head, or him or her, I'm not quite sure. I'm then taking the C5 marker and I'm going over a little bit where I coloured the C7 and then bringing that colour out further into the image. So I'm just trying to blend the C5 and the C7 together. And I do often like to jump with especially the grey markers. There is a C6 in between, but I don't think you necessarily need to have each of the markers for especially the greys. So now, for example, I'm jumping to the C3, so I'm not using the C4, and often I would do like even numbers or odd numbers and sort of jump kind of one, because you don't necessarily need to use them all, but you definitely could if you wanted to. So I'm again just blending out the colour. So I'm blending the C3 with the C5. And now I'm going in with C1. And my Copic marker is a little bit dry. I do need to refill it. So this is taking me a little bit longer to kind of blend the colours together than it probably would if the pen was juicier. So I've added in all of the colour apart from on the top of his or her face, but I wasn't quite happy with the blend that I got, so I'm going back in with the C3 and just adding a little bit more darkness towards those darker areas. And then I can go back in with that C1 again and blend that out. And then now I'm going in with C0 just to add that lightest colour at the top of the face. And then for the belly and the ears, ordinarily I would go with more of a muted tone, but I'm not actually having very much colour in this card at all. And so I wanted these colours to be a little bit more extreme than I ordinarily would. So I'm using some pinks here. I'm using RV55, RV52 and then RV00. And again, I'm kind of going between the shades. I go back in with the darkest shade just to add a little bit more darkness and then blend out again with the lighter shades. And then I forgot the tail here, so I'm going back in and I'm using C5, C3, C1 and C0 because I wanted it to be a little bit lighter than the rest of the body. And then for the guinea pig, I wanted the two kind of patches on his face and then a little one on his body to be the same grey tones. So I'm using C5, C3, C1 and C0. And then for the other parts, I'm using some browns. So I'm starting off with E37, then going in with E35, E33, and then I'll finish off with E31. And I do go in with the RV55 on his nose and then also the tiny little area in his ear as well. But I didn't catch that on camera because I had to get my head right over the image. And then for the balloon, I'm using some purple shades. And here is where I do my method slightly different. So I started off with the V17 and then I'm going in with my darkest shade, which is the V09. The V09 is really quite dark, and so I wanted to have a little bit of a base layer of that V17 down first. I then blended that out with the V15, but I wasn't again getting a great blend, so I kind of jump between the two shades when I go down the shading. So I used the V15 and then blended that out, and then the V12, and now I'm going in with the lightest shade, which is the V01, and then I do go back in with the V15 just to try and get that blend as smooth as possible. But I still wanted quite a highlight on that balloon. So sometimes it does take me a few layers just to get the colouring that I like. And then just finishing off with that V01 in the middle. I'm then taking the coordinating die from the Best Buds Dynamic set, placing that down with some low tack tape. And then I wanted to die cut some clouds as well, so I'm taking the clouds from the Honey Bunny Dynamic set. This is such an adorable set, but I just want the clouds from it today. And I'm going to die cut those from white cardstock, and I do die cut them twice. So I've run that through my die cutting machine, and I can just pop the pieces out. And like I said, I do cut the clouds another time just so that I have two of each shape. I've then got a panel of white cardstock here. This is cut to 4 1/4 inches wide by 5 1/4 inches tall. I'm then bringing in the bunny here, and then I can use the bunny so that I can figure out exactly where I want to stamp the sentiment. So I'm bringing in that sentiment from the Best Buds stamp set. And I want to try and have my sort of images in the middle of this panel. So I want to make sure that there's sort of the same amount of space at the top of the panel and then also below that sentiment as well. When I'm making clean and simple cards, which I do most of the time, I find that these details tend to make a little bit more of a difference than cards that maybe have a little bit more going on, because I find that your eye is kind of drawn to things like that more because there's less on the card. So I've inked up that sentiment with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and I'm just stamping that down onto the panel. And this is a pigment ink, so I'm just going to set that aside for a little while to dry while I adhere my clouds together. I didn't want to add these onto the card with foam tape, so I'm just going to stack them up so that they're too high, just to give a little bit of extra dimension. So I'm using the On Point Precision Glue, just adding a small amount of that onto one of the clouds, and then I can pop the other one on top. And then I'm just taking my time to line them up as best as possible. I then have an A2 size white card base here, so this is a finished size of 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches, and I'm adding a strip of paper from the Black and White Plaid paper pad at the bottom. So I've got a strip of that paper. I'm just adding some tape runner adhesive on the bottom of the card base, and then I can pop that panel on top. And I'm just lining it up on the one side, and then I can cut off the excess on the other side. I've then added some thin foam tape onto the back of this panel. And then because there is so much foam tape onto this, I want to make sure that it doesn't kind of crush or anything like that if I was to mail this card out. So I like to use a lot of foam tape, but because it can get really sticky, I'm adding some glue like kind of like a glue stick just along the back of that foam tape. You could use liquid glue as well. I just find that it gives me that extra kind of time to sort of wiggle the panel around and not stick straight away. And actually I really needed it because I started off by adding the panel this way and decided that I couldn't get it on straight. So I'm going to turn both the panel and the card upside down and then lean them up against my craft mat, and then all I've got to worry about is the two sides instead of having the top and the two sides to worry about. So I'm just lining that up as best as possible, and then I'm just kind of holding that in place, not actually pressing down until I'm sure that it is where I want it to be, and then I can press that down. I've then got my little bunny here, just figuring it out where I want the bunny to be, and then I can adhere the clouds down. So I'm just bringing in the clouds here. Again, I want to try and make it so that the images as a whole are kind of in the middle of the card. So I like to just take my time to start with working out where I want everything to be placed. And then I can add some more of the on point precision glue, onto the back of the clouds, and then I can pop those down. And then I've added some more thin foam tape onto the back of the bunny piece, just removing the backings with some tweezers. And then I can place that down onto the card. And this did take me a little while to get it exactly where I wanted it to be placed. Just kind of hovering it over there, and once I'm happy I can press that down. I'm then taking a 0.8 white gel pen and just adding one highlight onto the balloon. I did think about adding it onto the rest of the images and decided I didn't really want to. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. And then to finish off the card, I wanted to add some crystal glaze onto the bunny's nose, just to add a little bit of shine onto that. And once that dries, that will dry completely clear. So that is the card finished for today. Really clean and simple. The only colour on the card is actually in the image, but I quite like having that plain background. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description box here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.